Horse racing has always been a sport of intertwined triumphs and heartbreaks, of lives defined not only by speed, training, and instinct, but also by deep personal narratives. Few events encapsulate this emotional intensity more vividly than the Melbourne Cup, Australia's most famous 2-mile test, run at Flemington Racecourse. The Cup is not simply another race. It is a national cultural moment, a challenge of stamina, strategy, courage, and split-second decision-making. To win it is to join a lineage of names carved into the history of Australian sport. For Jaime Melham, her victory aboard Half Yours in the Melbourne Cup came not only with the weight of professional achievement, but also with profound private meaning, one shaped by the recent passing of her grandfather, by the long-evolving place of women in racing, and by the extraordinary dynamic of sharing both career and competition with her husband, fellow jockey Ben Melham, who also rode in the race. It was nearly a decade earlier that Michelle Payne made history in 2015 aboard Prince of Penzance, becoming the first female jockey to win the Melbourne Cup. At that time, Payne's victory was heralded as a turning point, a declaration that women, who had fought for the right to ride in major races for decades, belonged at the highest level of the sport. Yet structural barriers, professional skepticism, and deeply ingrained assumptions persisted. For another woman to win the Melbourne Cup after Payne would require not only exceptional skill, but resilience, persistence, and the willingness to withstand scrutiny that her male counterparts rarely encountered. On November 4th, Jaime Melham joined Payne as only the second woman ever to win the race, a statistic that reveals just how slowly progress has come and how meaningful her achievement is. Melham entered the race on Half Yours, a son of St. Jean, and notably the only Australian-bred horse in a field dominated by European-trained stayers. His lineage, training, and preparation made him something of an outsider in the public conversation leading up to the race. Yet in the eyes of those closest to him, including Melham, he possessed precisely the characteristics needed for Flemington's long tactical contest: endurance, responsiveness, and a competitive instinct that emerges only in the final crucial furlongs. Days before the Melbourne Cup, Melham had already guided Half Yours to victory in the prestigious Caulfield Cup on October 18th, a performance that demonstrated their deep connection and mutual trust. That win, however, carried heavy emotional weight. It was, as she later shared, the last race her grandfather watched before he passed away. In a quiet, reflective tone, speaking to Racing.com after her Melbourne Cup victory, Melham dedicated her ride to him. "A big shout-out to my grandpa up there. He watched the Caulfield Cup. That was the last thing he did before he passed away. Now he's up in heaven watching me. I can't go to the funeral on Thursday, but I'm sure he'd rather I was here and riding some more winners for him." The comment revealed the tension many jockeys experience. Their work demands relentless travel, strict weight control, and constant readiness. Grief, family needs, and personal milestones often must be postponed. The world of racing rarely pauses. Her Melbourne Cup victory was not one won by circumstance or luck. The ride itself was a portrait of tactical intelligence and composure. Melham allowed Half Yours to settle early on the rail, saving vital ground during the first full lap around Flemington. Rather than forcing him forward too soon or asking him to chase early leaders, she allowed the race to develop organically around them. The key moment arrived in the final stretch, as traffic built and openings became narrow. Where some riders might have panicked and swung wide to avoid congestion, Melham waited, watching the rhythm of the horses around her, reading the moment before making her move. When the gap emerged, she asked Half Yours to quicken. The pair accelerated smoothly, took command, and did not relinquish it, drawing away to win by 2 3/4 lengths in 3:22.46 over soft going. It was a decisive victory, one that showed tactical clarity, patience, and emotional steadiness, qualities that define the best jockeys, regardless of gender. In finishing the race so strongly, Melham also became the only woman in history to complete the Caulfield Cup Melbourne Cup double, a feat that has eluded generations of jockeys. Her triumph was greeted with admiration and celebration by much of the racing world. But it unfolded alongside an intimate personal subplot. Her husband, Ben Melham, was also in the race, riding Smokin' Romans, who ultimately finished 14th. Their shared presence in the Cup captured public imagination. Two jockeys, two competitors, two life partners, each striving to win the most consequential race in Australian turf. The challenge of living within the same profession, let alone the same race day field, brings with it both connection and complexity. For Jaime and Ben Melham, racing is not just employment. It is a shared language, a common rhythm of early mornings, track work, form study, travel, and emotional stakes that run higher than outsiders often realize. When spouses or partners compete professionally against each other in any sport, they must navigate a delicate balance between mutual support and individual ambition. The Melbourne Cup magnified that dynamic. In this case, one partner achieved the ultimate victory while the other finished deep in the field. Yet by all public accounts, the moment was one of joy rather than rivalry. Theirs is a shared career lived in parallel tracks, always in motion but moving in the same direction. The race also held international significance. Parchment Party, trained by U.S. Hall of Fame trainer Bill Mott, became the first American-trained horse ever to start in the Melbourne Cup, with Hall of Fame jockey John Velazquez making his Cup debut aboard him. Their appearance brought additional global attention, though they finished 20th of the 24 runners. One's Operator, an Indiana bred with over $1 million in earnings and a career largely spent in Europe, finished in a dead heat for 16th and is expected to remain in Australia to continue racing. The Melbourne Cup has long drawn international challengers, but in recent years, heightened veterinary regulations have reshaped the composition of the field and the types of horses who participate. These regulations were introduced after a series of high-profile equine fatalities in previous cups sparked public outrage, regulatory pressure, and concern for the future of the race itself. In 2021, Racing Victoria implemented some of the strictest pre-race screening procedures in global racing, including mandatory CT scans for international entrants, heightened lameness assessments, photographic gait documentation, and continuous veterinary review. Since these steps were introduced, the Melbourne Cup has not experienced a single fatality. The 2024 running continued that trend, with all 24 horses finishing the race structurally sound. Nevertheless, the sport has not escaped controversy. Even as Half Yours crossed the finish line in triumph, images circulated showing the horse bleeding from the mouth. The bleeding, which can result from bit pressure, lip abrasions, or inner cheek pinching, is not uncommon in racing. However, for a public increasingly unfamiliar with equine athletic physiology and already wary of racing's safety record, the sight was disturbing. On social media platform X, formerly Twitter, some users reacted with anger or condemnation. One wrote, "Seeing pics of the Melbourne Cup winning horse bleeding from the mouth makes me so viscerally angry. Why are we still allowing horse racing to be a thing? It's cruelty and those horses deserve better." Another expressed a similar sentiment. "Have never and will never participate in the watching, betting, attending of Melbourne Cup. The winning horse left the ground bleeding from the mouth. How is this remotely humane?" Such reactions demonstrate the widening cultural divide between those within the racing industry, who tend to view incidents like lip abrasions as minor and treatable, and members of the general public who often interpret any visible harm as evidence of systemic cruelty. In this sense, the controversy surrounding Half Yours was less about the horse's specific condition and more about broader debates surrounding the sport's ethics and future. Yet within this swirl of public discourse, Jaime Melham's personal and athletic achievement remains profound. She rode the best race of her life while carrying grief. She honored her grandfather in the way he would have wished. She joined one of the rarest groups in the history of the sport. And she did so while competing alongside her husband, another elite athlete navigating the same pressures. Their story speaks to the nuance of partnership in high-pressure professions. Love, in their world, does not diminish ambition. It instead shapes the resilience required to pursue it. The Melbourne Cup lasts only a few minutes, but the preparation for it extends across months, years, and often entire lives. For Jaime and Ben Melham, those minutes represented the intersection of identity, family, profession, and history. For Jaime, the victory was both a culmination and a beginning. For Ben, the race was a reminder of the unpredictability of sport and the strength of shared commitment. For both, it affirmed that partnership can endure even in the most competitive of arenas. In the end, the Melbourne Cup of 2024 will be remembered not only for Half Your's performance or for the ongoing debates surrounding racing welfare, but for the image of a wife and husband who rode together in the same race, one finding victory, the other accepting defeat, and walking forward side by side into whatever races will come next.